welcome back to my channel TCNT, which stands for True Crime and Trials. So this video is part 2 of day 2 of the Groves trial, and the next witness was Dr. Muhammad Ali, who was the paediatrician. He saw Dylan at the hospital when he was born, and then a couple of times after he'd been discharged in his office. And again stating that Dylan had to stay in the hospital longer than usual because of the drug withdrawals. And they asked him about the symptoms of drug withdrawals in babies, and he said they usually are sneezing a lot, have excessive diarrhea, tremors, and the tremors are a major symptom of drug withdrawal, and irritability and lack of appetite. He's not sure if babies actually do experience pain during withdrawals, but he can't be certain on that. On the 16th of January was the next visit to Dr. Ali, and it was a routine checkup to make sure he had recovered well from the withdrawals, and it was an appointment that Andrea took him to because she had him in her custody at the time. She did mention that he was still sneezing a lot, and she had seen a few tremors. He was weighed again, and he weighed £5 5 ounces and was 19 inches long. But there was nothing unusual on that visit with him, and he was doing well. He saw him again with Andrea on the 23rd of January. The only concern Andrea had with him at the time was that he was excessively sweating, but Dr. Ali didn't think it was related to the drug withdrawals. And he weighed him again, and he weighed nearly £6 and was 19 inches, so he was gaining weight slowly and doing really well. So that was his testimony. The next one is for Dr. Gregory Hudson, and he's another paediatrician, and this guy was so nice. If I wanted a paediatrician for my kids, I'd like him. He was so nice. On the 7th of February 2019, he treated Dylan. He became involved because of the blood screening that he'd had, and obviously it had come back abnormal, which is pretty normal, but he'd asked Jessica and Daniel to take him back for another blood screening, which they actually did. And he said that Dylan was bottle fed, and this has been mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's because that drugs were actually found in Dylan's system during autopsy, that they're trying to point out the ways that he could have ingested it. Obviously breastfeeding would have been one of them, but he was actually bottle fed. At the appointment, he weighed £7 2 ounces and his length was 9.5 inches, so he's doing really well with his weight. He arranged another appointment with them for the 21st of February, and they did take him to this appointment. And the mix-up with this blood screening is that the blood screening wasn't done fully, which meant that some of the conditions that they test for weren't tested for. He had next appointments set up for the 7th of March and the 2nd of May, but he didn't see Dylan again after the last appointment on the 21st of February. The practice sent letters to Jessica and Daniel, but they never heard back from them. The attorney asked him how a baby would react from a fractured skull, and he said they would be in pain, they would cry, they would lose appetite. He would scream from the pain. Jessica's attorney gets up for the cross-examination, and the only thing about that was she asked him about if anything stood out to him about Jessica and Daniel, meaning basically asking, seeing if he saw any evidence that they were using or there was any weird behaviour going on, but he said nothing stood out to him about Jessica and Daniel. So that was that. the state attorney gets back up again, and she asks him how a baby would be acting if they were under the influence of methamphetamine. And he said the baby would be overstimulated, such as crying a lot, possible vomiting, and not sleeping, obviously because it's a stimulant. So, and she asked about the circumference of his head, which was 38.6 centimetres, which is 14 inches. And she points out the fact that during the autopsy, the skull fractures were measured, and he had a 2-inch skull fracture on his head. So we're on to Andrea Bowling, who was the foster mum. Now, this was a hard testimony. I knew it was going to be hard because, you know, she got this baby when he was, 5-6 days old, and she helped him get through the drug withdrawals. So, coming from my point of view, if I'd have done that, I would have had a connection with that baby. Andrea has been a teacher for 18 years, and she became a foster parent in July of 2017. She'd gone through all the training and everything, but she hadn't fostered a baby before Dylan. So when she got the call that asked her if she'd take baby Dylan, when she went to the hospital, the nurses went through everything that was going on with Dylan and what to look out for and how to care for him through, help him through his withdrawals and everything. And Andrea keeps crying, and you can just see the heartbreak in her eyes, and I think she's just broken. When she took him home, she saw the effects the withdrawals were having on him. She saw the tremors he was having. She saw the tremors where his arms and legs would jerk, and he had sweats, and he wanted to be held all the time when he wasn't sleeping. Kudos to this woman for doing what she does. So while she's talking about this, she actually breaks down crying and can't actually gather herself together to carry on, so they take a recess to let her get herself together. So they go over the family meeting she had with them, where she was in with them for a bit before she left and let Jessica and Daniel be alone with Dylan. And she said she felt Jessica was under the influence, purely based on the fact that she'd seen people under the influence of drugs before. She said Jessica was flailing her arms around. She was really happy and excited. She was giddy. And Andrea said it was odd behaviour to her under the circumstances. She said Daniel was quiet and she didn't suspect he was under the influence of anything. A couple of days after that meeting, she was told she was going to have to take Dylan back to the office because they were giving him back to Daniel. When she met Daniel there, she gave Daniel a couple of pictures that she'd taken of Dylan. And she also gave Daniel a letter saying how much she loved Dylan and she still wanted to be part of his life if they'd let her. She wanted to speak to them about any milestones he met and what he was doing, how well he was doing. And she, in the letter, she said to them to call her anytime. She gave them her number if they needed help, if they wanted her to take him for a bit, to give them a break. Cross-examination, Jessica's attorney gets up. She didn't agree with Dylan being given back to Daniel so soon. She thought it was too early. She'd only had Dylan for 12 days. And she didn't think it was long enough. And she did express her concerns to Child Services. So the next is Detective Adam Giles, who was asked to help find Dylan. He got all the info that they needed to get the search warrant to search the Groves' home. Once he had got that, he arranged and planned the execution of the search warrant. And when they got to the home, they surrounded the whole home and made it known they were there. They, knocked on the door and everything, no answer on the, so they went back to the vehicles and used the PA system. About 15 to 20 minutes later, Jessica comes out. The detective says she's irritated, aggravated and upset they're there. She's screaming at them saying, "Why the F are you there? He didn't do anything. Leave us alone." Adam asks her who else is in the house. She won't tell him anything. She's uncooperative. He asked her if Dylan was in there, and she initially said she didn't have a baby. They kept asking if Daniel was in there. They continuously tried to make contact through the PA system with Daniel. Now, one of the officers that were around the back had seen someone look out of the window or the door, but they couldn't tell who it was. So they obviously had some idea that someone else was in there. They actually got one of the robots to go into the house, as they weren't sure if Daniel had a gun or anything, so it was safer to send the robot in there. The robot shows that there's no one in the kitchen or the living room, and the robot turns to the hallway and it faced towards a door. And the officers can speak through the robot, so obviously they were talking all the time and asking whoever was in there to come out. The robot actually got up to the door, and the robot can knock on the door, and nobody answered, and the robot can actually reach up and open the door. It opens the door and shows someone lying on the bed, and they immediately sit up, and Daniel gets up. They obviously tell him who they are, ask him to come out, and he does so. He said when he came out that he'd been asleep and he had no clue what was going on. The police had knocked on the door. They'd shouted on the PA system. Jessica had already come out. They asked Daniel where Dylan was, and he said the same as Jessica, what Jessica had said eventually, that child services had taken him. Next, yeah. Okay, so the next witness is Captain John Murphy, and he became aware of the case through another officer speaking about the case. So on the 20th of May 2019, there was an incident at the residence where he was asked to go with another officer to see if they could find the Groves and Dylan. They drove up the driveway and got out and walked up to the home, and there were dogs outside and dogs inside. They could hear them. They walked around but couldn't find anything apart from the dogs that were also inside. Excuse me. They back out of the driveway and they see a neighbour. So they get out and speak to the neighbour, and the neighbour says, "I know why you're here." And he said, "You're trying to locate the Groves." John then asked if he'd seen the child, and the neighbour hadn't seen Dylan at all. He said the Groves leave early morning hours and come back late at night on a four-wheeler. And while John was speaking to this neighbour, he could actually hear what he thought was the four-wheeler coming towards them. And as they passed where John was stood talking to the neighbour confirmed it was them on the four-wheeler. So John and his colleague ran back to his car and started chasing after them. And at one point, he put the sirens on. So at one point, Daniel and Jessica made it look like they were pulling in. So John thought they were pulling in, and he was starting to, and then they just sped off again into a field. So they chased after him, but then Daniel and Jessica rode off into a wood and he couldn't follow them there. But he did get a good look at them, and it was definitely them. John also helped with the recovery of Dylan's body. I'm going to leave it there and do another video for the last of the witnesses for day 2, because I think this video is long enough. It's only how many? 1, 2. I'll carry on. I apologise now for another long one, but then if I get these done, then we can get on to day 3. So next is Jessica Burd. She works at the Mahajan Therapeutics, which is where Jessica went for her drug therapy. Jessica Burd is actually a therapist and a drug and alcohol counsellor, and in January 2019 she did an assessment on Jessica Groves. She recommended that Jessica did individual therapy, group counselling twice a week, and a women's group every Friday, and every time Jessica went into Mahajan they do drug tests every visit. She saw Jessica for an individual therapy session on the 8th of February, and on the 18th of January she'd recommended that Jessica had a mental health assessment, which is routine for them to refer them for one of them. So after the 8th of February visit, Jessica obviously Jessica Groves turned up for the first individual meeting with Jessica Burd, but after that she became inconsistent with attending and she eventually stopped going. They again tried calling her, and then Jessica Burd went to Child Services to report that Jessica wasn't attending anymore. She again saw her once on the 26th of March at a group counselling session. So Jessica Burd then thought, well, obviously her attempts at trying to contact her had made her think that she should come back and carry on with her treatment. But she said Jessica was defensive and edgy and angry, and she was upset with Child Services because they weren't letting her be with her baby. So Jessica Burd was concerned about her behaviour, and based on her experience, her behaviour was representative of methamphetamine use. And they asked her about help with transportation if a patient couldn't get in due to transport, that Mahajan would provide transportation into the centre. So, you know, her excuses of not being able to get there were null and void because she could have got there if she'd have spoke to them. Jessica's cross-examination attorney, they just point out that it does happen that patients do drop off programmes and then jump back on them again. It's pretty normal. Cross-examination for Daniel's attorney, confirming that she never received a referral for Daniel, and then saying that drug usage could lead to violent outbursts. So then the last witness of the day is Greg Dunham. Now he's an intake investigator at juvenile court, and as an intake officer he deals with truant children, abuse and neglect. Initially he became familiar with Jessica because she had been ordered to report to him as part of the treatment tracker program, which is obviously she's been ordered to have treatment, so it's been forwarded to him as well for him to keep track of it because it's part of her conditions. She had to report to him twice a month, And he first met her on the 24th of January in his office in the court building. They discussed what she was required to do, and she had an assessment for family drug court, and their aim is to reunify them with their children. So obviously a lot of people were working with her to try and get her on the straight and narrow to be able to be a mum to Dylan. She was then given a sheet with all the appointments that she had to keep up with when she went to see Greg. But she missed 3 appointments before he saw her again on the 28th of March. And the appointments she missed, she said it was due to the fact that she had no transport to get there. On the 31st of May, Greg met with the judge, and he told him that Child Services had contacted... No, on the 31st of May, the judge contacted Greg and wanted Greg to go in and speak to him, and the judge told him that Child Services had been in contact with him to say they couldn't get hold of the Groves. So he went to the house to see if he could get any joy, and he was unsuccessful. He left a card. He tried again on the 3rd of June, the 4th of June, the 5th of June and the 10th of June, and still all were unsuccessful. They couldn't... Sorry, I'm going to have a drink. He did at one point actually make contact with a neighbour, and the neighbour said he didn't really speak with them but saw them coming in and out of the driveway. He spoke to another neighbour and he said more or less the same thing, and this neighbour advised him that he should try later on in the evenings. He also spoke to someone that identified as Daniel's brother, and he said he really didn't have anything to do with Daniel or Jessica. He was in attendance when the search warrant was carried out on the 10th of June, and obviously he'd already been there that morning. He spoke to Jessica after she'd come out. She was put in his car, and she told him she couldn't understand why law enforcement were out looking for the baby, because Child Services had been there and taken Dylan 2 to 3 weeks ago. So tomorrow we are on to day 3. Now that is a very, 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 very hard day. So I'll be back with that, but there will be a warning for that one, because the medical examiner does her testimony. So I'll be back with that, and I'd just like to say a quick thank you to all my new subscribers and to all of you that are putting comments and saying how much you enjoy my videos. I just want you to let you know that I appreciate you all, and thank you so much for watching. It's a very new thing for me, and you know, putting myself out there, it's a huge, huge thing. So thank you to you all, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.